Tonight, a former national chief is now suing the Assembly of First Nations for millions.
Everyone encounters an image of an Indian at one point or another. It captures something in their imagination.
A new documentary explores how Indigenous people have shaped Western culture.
Never would have ever thought that I'd be something ever so awesome for that artist I was listening.
And just chill to the next episode. Snoop Dogg makes a stop in the prairies. Good evening, I'm Chris Nachkate. Welcome to APTN National News. A former national chief of the Assembly of First Nations has launched a $5 million lawsuit against the organization. Roseanne Archibald was the first woman to be elected national chief of the AFN in the summer of 2021, but she was often at odds with the regional chiefs that make up the executive during her time in office. In 2022, Archibald faced allegations of workplace harassment by AFN staffers. In response, she said these allegations were a result of her calling for greater financial transparency in the organization. Archibald was officially ousted from the national chief position at a special chiefs meeting in June of 2023. The statement of claims says she is seeking damages for defamation, breach of contract, and negligence. Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak was elected national chief in December of 2023. In an emailed statement, the AFN said it will not comment on the ongoing litigation. A unique partnership between a housing developer and a First Nation in British Columbia is expected to benefit for low-income families on reserve. These 4 homes built in 2016 were originally slated for demolition to make way for higher density development, which is supposed to preserve natural landscapes and keep building projects within specific areas. But then the developer reached out to Stahelis, a First Nation, and offered the homes to them for free. Willie Charlie is Grand Chief of the Reserve. He welcomes the help.
I think it'll have a huge impact in our community. You know how most First Nations communities do have inadequate housing for all of their members. When the housing developments that they do have, like some of them are old, moldy, we call the Indian agent homes, the matchsticks houses, and so we have such a huge waiting list that this will definitely be able to be used by low-income families units.
There has been a growing awareness in recent years about the tragedy of missing Indigenous women and girls. Last week, paddlers canoed and demonstrators marched to shine light on another crisis. The 3rd annual Memorial March honored murdered and missing Indigenous boys and men and Two-Spirit people. CTV's Martin McMahon has more.
I feel good just to be here to show my support to them.
Sage filled the air for the 3rd annual Memorial March in honor of missing and murdered Indigenous boys and men and Two-Spirit people. Hope, too, mixed with sadness for those who never made it home. People coming on behalf of sons, brothers, and friends. This woman here on behalf of 2 of her cousin's sons who are missing.
It's really hard. Yeah, I can't imagine what they're going through, but I just want to show my support to them today.
For the families, we want to bring that awareness forward because they're important too. And our men and boys matter as well.
This man coming on behalf of a friend who died following a so-called Starlight tour in which police in Saskatoon were accused of leaving Indigenous men at the edge of town in freezing conditions.
It's a celebration of honoring our people that have gone missing. It sounds strange to say, but that's what we're doing. We're bringing a good positive message today, but the truth is, hey, it's continuing to happen.
And while support for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls has been in focus in recent years, the profile hasn't been so high when it comes to Indigenous men and boys.
And the percentage of men gone missing is larger than women. And this has been going on for 50 years in places right across the country and the U.S.
The march started at the Vancouver Police Department's headquarters before going over the Cambie Street Bridge and wrapping up in Creekside Park. It also featured the arrival of a canoe transporting sweetgrass, symbolizing medicine and healing. Martin McMahon, CTV News, Vancouver.
A new hospital project for First Nations people in Northern Ontario got some much-needed federal funding on Monday. At a press conference in Ottawa, Minister of Indigenous Services Patty Hajdu announced the feds are contributing their share of $1.2 billion for a new hospital in the Winnebago Area Health Authority. The new facility will replace the existing hospital in Moose Factory, which is aging and in disrepair. It will be located in Moosonee and serve about 12,000 people in the region. The funding matches what the Ontario government has already promised. Hajdu faced questions about why the funding wasn't announced in last spring's federal budget.
I think part of the challenge is that the federal government isn't the contractor, is not the proponent, and there were many questions to the Ontario government about the nature of the money, about the nature of the payment contracts, and I think for me, we really saw a change when we were able to engage directly with the contracting company directly. So that gave, I think, the federal government the clarity on the $1.2 billion ask.
To water woes in Calgary, where a major water crisis continues to unfold for almost 2 weeks now. The mayor is calling for a complete review of the original water main break that triggered the emergency.
I know you want to understand what happened to this pipe in the first place, and I do too.
The original pipe that burst has now been fixed, but there are still other repairs being done elsewhere, so-called hotspots that have been identified as being at risk of imminent failure. Repairs are estimated to take another 3 to 5 weeks, meaning that severe water restrictions and traffic headaches will continue, and it is leading to a lot of anger and frustration from residents. We're always looking for your feedback or news story ideas. Here's how you can continue the conversation. If you have a story you want to share, send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to aptnnews.ca. You can find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, LinkedIn, and X. And you can watch this newscast anytime, anywhere from your phone on YouTube. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. We have to take a quick break, but when we return, how a new documentary examines Indigenous people's influence in Western culture. We'll be right back. Stick around.
So really the film ended up in large part really discovering hidden stories that have been hidden to all of us about the massive Indigenous influence on Western culture.
Welcome back. A new documentary called Red Fever looks at how Indigenous people influenced Western culture, from negative issues such as cultural appropriation and the stereotypes that persist to this day. Angel Moore reports.
Everyone encounters an image of an Indian at one point or another. It captures something in their imagination.
This documentary is called Red Fever, the Indigenous Influence on Western Culture. Neil Diamond stars and co-directed Red Fever. He says pop culture stereotypes Indigenous peoples.
They were kind of disappointed that I wasn't dressed like what they were seeing in movies, you know, didn't have buckskin or long hair, braid. Yeah, so sorry to disappoint.
Co-director Catherine Bainbridge says the film looks deeper into the obsession of Indigenous culture.
Cultural appropriations may be kind of passé in a way. Kind of everybody knows you're not supposed, or a lot of people know, you're not supposed to do it. But we had a sneaking suspicion that a lot of non-Native people, mainstream people, didn't know why, and they might be too afraid to ask, and they didn't really know all the really what it's all about. So that's how Red Fever came about.
Red Fever includes how Indigenous culture gets appropriated for fashion on the runways, in movies, and sports mascots. Diamond is from the Waskaganish Cree community in Quebec. He says it can be flattery or offensive.
I get why people are so offended, you know, they're hurt by what they see, especially their culture being appropriated, especially the people who've lost so much, like they don't have their language, like their grandfathers probably don't speak their language, and they don't hear the stories the way they're meant to be heard.
But Red Fever goes further and shows Indigenous influence down through history, such as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy's system of government and its impact on the new American democracy, and how Indigenous people affected sports through athletes like Jim Thorpe.
So really the film ended up in large part really discovering hidden stories that have been hidden to all of us about the massive Indigenous influence on Western culture.
Diamond hopes Red Fever will inspire future generations.
I hope that they look to their history more, talk to their elders. Like that's how we got started with the nation and filmmaking, as we filmed like our elders, and they told us, our very rich history, and I think a film like this will, it will instill pride in a lot of young people,
Red Fever is playing in theaters across the country. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax.
Accounting firm Deloitte Canada is helping to amplify the voices of Indigenous youth. It hopes that government and industry will read its newly released report and fight climate change to one day achieve environmental reconciliation. Joining me today to talk more about it is Mitch Mercurdy, Director of Nation Building Advisory at Deloitte Canada. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Mercurdy. Can you first tell our viewers how much Indigenous communities are being impacted by flooding compared to non-Indigenous communities in Canada?
Indigenous communities throughout Canada, like the studies have shown, Indigenous peoples living on reserve are 18 times more likely than other Canadians to be evacuated due to climate emergencies and disaster. 81% of First Nations lands are exposed to flooding, and 40 to 41 locations are at highest risk of flood hazards based on flood exposure and social vulnerability measures.
Can you explain what that does to Indigenous youth when they're being displaced all the time and evacuated due to flooding?
A lot of it can play on their social well-being, their mental health. Having to move, I know my community of Fort Chipewyan, Alberta, last year due to wildfires, they had to be removed from the community, and they all live in Fort McMurray. And I myself, coming from Fort McMurray originally, in the 2016 fires, we had to be displaced as well for a couple months. So it wasn't very good, but at the same time, what we noticed is family came together. Like during distress like that, we come together, but at the same time, it's getting out of the norms that you kind of have to, like the youth experienced. I'm not too sure what they would have experienced. I know there was a lot of fear with the fires, a lot of fear of their house burning. And that's just a fire. Floods are totally different as well, where floods can be, their house could be washed down. Like in British Columbia, they had major floods, and a lot of First Nations were affected as well.
Yeah. What, in this report, what are some of the main recommendations that stood out for you?
One of the big recommendations that stood out to me was respect for Indigenous traditional knowledge and the connections to lands. So implement Indigenous language and cultural revitalization efforts. A lot of our youth spoke out how our languages are being lost. Invest in Indigenous-led land-based language learning and cultural camps, such as medicine walks, hunting, harvesting, fishing methods, storytelling, forest renewal practices, design public urban spaces for land-based activities, incorporate local Indigenous knowledge and perspectives in community planning and urban design. especially for our urban folks. A lot of the youth, they don't have that connection to the land, same as someone living on the reserve or the Métis settlement or up in the north in their community. They have that connection, but as soon as you take them out of the land, they don't have that. So we need to start working with the schools. A good example would be the Fort McMurray Public School Division, where they are working with the schools, where they are taking both Indigenous and non-Indigenous students and taking them out on the land and teaching them from our local elders, harvesters, trappers, talking about the lands, medicines, and why it's important to keep them healthy. And then you get that whole reciprocity of why it's important to care for them. And it's not just Indigenous kids, but it's all.
Yeah. What, finally, really briefly here, what do you hope stakeholders and governments take away from this report?
Really, part of this whole report was to spark an interest. You know, this report was meant to inspire decision makers to examine the progress of their reconciliation efforts. That accounts for the experience of young Indigenous people and to ensure their efforts have meaningful, positive impacts for Indigenous people. Our youth were very frank with us and said that we want to be heard and we want to make a loud bang that we need to be heard. We need to be at those tables. When we look at the next 7 generations, and this is how they're already thinking, is the impacts to our environment, they're already thinking the 7 generations, and that's why they need to be heard. They need to be at those tables. Not just the youth, but also our Indigenous people need to be at those tables and making some of those decisions with corporate Canada.
Yeah. Well, thank you for speaking with us today, Mr. McCurdy.
Thank you. Merci Cho. Okay.
A quick break now, but when we return, Snoop D-O-double-G laid back in Winnipeg this week. We'll tell you how he was received by some of his Indigenous fans.
Very thoughtful process. So Snoop Dogg, wear this with pride because it comes from Winnipeg, Manitoba Treaty 1.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Our APTN News graphics extraordinaire Shania Murdoch was visiting the Winnipeg Zoo and got a picture of an ever adorable meerkat. This one was on guard protecting the meerkats that live at the zoo. Thanks, Shania, for that ever cute picture. We want to see your photos. Send them to share at aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Over on the East Coast, Halifax 31, Fredericton 35. The Grand River 21, Nuujjuaq 9. Val d'Or 32, Saguenay 32 as well. Peterborough 32, Toronto 33. Sioux Lookout 19, Timmins 31. Puckatawagan 14, Churchill 8. Gimli 20, Barons River 18. Saskatoon 18, Estevan 20. Buffalo Narrows 18, Stony Rapids 17. Northern AB, High Level 23, Fort McMurray 21. Calgary 16, Medicine Hat 18 with rain. Campbell River 23, Kamloops 23 with rain. Dease Lake 24, Smithers 25. Yukon, Whitehorse 25, Mayo 24 with rain. Yellowknife 18, Norman Wells 20. Inuvik 10, Colville Lake 13. Baker Lake 10, Chesterfield 7. Arctic Bay 5, Agulik 3. It is now down to a must-win situation for the Edmonton Oilers tonight. Another big game, Game 5 against the Florida Panthers. Now remember, just when many thought it was over, the Edmonton Oilers pulled off a massive surprise on the weekend with a crushing 8-1 victory over Florida. And so some fans aren't that concerned that it's do or die once again for the team.
Oh, we've got this 100%. Like, I have complete faith in the team.
They've been down a few times, like 3 or 4 times, and they've always come back. So we're on the right track right now, and I think that's what's going to happen.
The Oilers now trail the Panthers 3-1 after Edmonton's dominant 8-1 win Saturday night in Edmonton, while Florida is just 1 win away from hoisting their first ever Stanley Cup. Edmonton is hoping to become the first team since the 1942 Toronto Maple Leafs to come back from a 3-0 deficit to win the Cup. Hip-hop artist Snoop Dogg is on his Cali and Canada tour and rolled down the streets of Winnipeg last night. And one woman from Pimichikamak Cree Nation got an opportunity for her beating to be gifted to the big boss Dogg himself. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
Oh, that's so cool. Oh, I love how you did that.
Brandy Boubier is seeing this custom artwork piece in person for the first time.
A dear friend of mine, she was going to make it, and she was saying, like, I'm struggling with the design, and I feel like I'm not supposed to make this. Like, maybe, like, reach out to my friend Lisa. She does deadly work too.
Despite the concert being 5 days away, Lisa Muswagan said she was up for the challenge.
When I looked at it, at first she gave me like the letters like Snoop, and it had like a leaf on it, and I was like, if this is gonna go to Snoop Dogg, it has to be like really dope.
Muswagan ended up giving it a 3D style, one that she says makes the medallion stand out in any kind of lighting.
A lot of thoughtful thinking, like, hey, the hair has to be matted, his shirt will be shiny, like the mustache and the goatee has to be matted to kind of give it the hair feel. And so it was just kind of like a lot of strategy, very thoughtful process. So Snoop Dogg, wear this with pride because it comes from Winnipeg, Manitoba Treaty 1.
Boubier did get the medallion to the artist. While it didn't make an appearance on the main stage, Muswagan remains grateful for the opportunity, reminiscing about her days as a teenager on the res, listening to the Dogg father.
Never would have ever thought that I'd beat something ever so awesome for that artist I was listening to then. Yeah.
Inner child is happy today.
My inner Cross-Lake Lisa is happy.
This type of beating isn't the first to make it into the hands of an artist.
When Ice Cube did his tour, somebody threw a medallion on stage, like just hoping that he would get it, and he was so appreciative. This is Indigenous land, and so we should be giving him something that's connected to Indigenous land and Indigenous people.
Connections that Muswagan says the art industry needs.
Man, I encourage all you new beaters out there, just keep going no matter what anybody says. Beating is a life skill and a life journey. There was a time where I had to take like a day off because it wasn't looking like Snoop. It looked like a random uncle. No, just kidding.
Now she's sea-walking her way to the bank with the money she made from this custom order made for D-O-G-G. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Fingers crossed Snoop Dogg wears it on the tour down the road here. Fingers crossed. And that's your evening national newscast for this Tuesday, June 18th. Be sure to join us again for your midday newscast tomorrow at 12 p.m. Winnipeg time. We hope the Edmonton Oilers can get another win against the Florida Panthers tonight. Go Oilers, go. Don't let us down, boys. From our HQ here in Winnipeg and from our reporters across the country, hi miigwech. Thank you for watching.